Well, welcome once again. This is the Doctor of Digital podcast. And the purpose of the show is to be transformative. I introduce busy business leaders to trends in business, technology, marketing your message. And this is the shortest jam packed business podcast to introduce and highlight people you should know. Did you know the world's premier amphibious warfare force? Specializing in landing from sea to shore and fighting on land, the tough and determined leathernecks, devil dogs, and jarheads reflect the Marine Corps' identity and lasting legacy for the greatest country in the history of the world. Startups dance a delicate tango with talent retention, the thrill of the unknown, and the promise of explosive growth attract bright minds drawn to the dynamic environment and the chance to shape something new. Investing in talent retention isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Acknowledge the emotional toll of intense work with flexible schedules and wellness initiatives. And remember, money talks, but it doesn't whisper. One question you need to ask yourself and answer today is, how do I attract and retain the best employees? During this episode, we'll discuss the changes and hot topics in startups and talent retention. Let's navigate these waters to understand these areas better and see how they can work for you. By the end of this episode, I'm going to encourage you to contact my guest, startup and talent retention expert, Gerry. Gerry, thank you for being on the show today. Welcome to the program. Thanks for taking out some time from your busy schedule.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Now, people are curious, of course, how did you get to this place in the first place? So tell us a little bit about your background and so that we know a little bit about what you're saying.
Depending on who you ask, the answer might be bad life choices. But the straighter answer is this. I was a Marine SIG-inter, fell in love with the technology intelligence world there. Post-Marine Corps, I stayed on the technology path, took classes in software development and Unix and Linux administration.
Gotcha.
And then, funny story, I've been doing this now, for more than 25 years. I answered an advertisement in a newspaper for a junior Linux kernel engineer at a staffing agency. And in those days, I didn't even know what a staffing agency was. I just knew that they had a job that I was interested in. So I went to interview, and probably the biggest draw for me in that role, Mick, was that they offered training for the right candidate. So I get out there, drive an hour and a half to the location. In those days, we did all of our interviews in person, and discovered that the recruiter I was supposed to meet with had a personal problem and had to leave the office. The manager felt bad, interviewed me in that recruiter's stead, and 15 minutes into the interview determined that I wasn't a match for the role, but I'd ever considered becoming a technical recruiter. And that's how my journey began, something of a misadventure that, lemons became lemonade. And fast forward throughout that, I was a recruiter. I was a recruiting leader. I became a staffing salesperson. Then I became a consultant in the industry. I helped technology services and product companies to grow. Started my own management consulting company called Influence Understood, where I work with technology service and product companies in sales training and recruiter training and in management training. That job evolved into me taking senior executive roles in companies on long-term contracts, president, COO, to help them to attain a certain goal. And what I learned in doing that became the company that I now own and run, Redbeard Solutions, and the book that I wrote, Destination Employer.
Now, when you make references to things like newspapers, we have to tell our audience what a newspaper is because people don't read. But I'm curious now, this is going back some time. So what would you say are some of the biggest changes that you've seen? And then also maybe this is part of what you're saying in your book too. You tell us a little bit. So what are the changes that have taken place in the field?
Gosh, it might be easier to ask what didn't change. So I work predominantly in the technology space. So from a purely technology perspective, the answer is nearly everything.
Yeah.
I would say, though, from a business perspective, probably the single biggest change is the difficulty in attaining true connection. In
Mm,
an age where it's never been easier to get someone's contact information, it's
right.
never been harder to meaningfully engage with a person,
Yeah.
whether they're a candidate for a role you're trying to fill in your company or a prospect you're trying to engage with to sell them your service or your product.
Hmm.
That's probably the biggest thing.
And that sounds like it's really an issue of communication, right? So, I mean, I'd have to agree with you. It's very difficult in what we're saying. We have this information glut, right? You can find all kind of information. That's the great thing about the internet. But is there knowledge there? Is there wisdom? But it's also very difficult to engage people in conversations because they're not accustomed to it because there's so much technology.
Completely agree. I'll even take one step further back and
Right.
steal a phrase from my signals intelligence days. It's difficult to separate the signal from the noise.
Hmm.
People are inundated with messages. Heck, I spend an enormous amount of time on the LinkedIn platform, and I get just inundated with clearly AI written sales messaging from junior folks that didn't do any research to understand whether or not I'm a good prospect for them. It's just hard to break through that to have meaningful conversations. And there's strategies I talk about a lot in my book because it's critical to your success. But there's strategies to get past that. But that's probably the single biggest change. I'll
And
give you one last example, and excuse
yeah.
me for hogging the mic, as it were. But when I first started selling many, many moons ago, when the earth was young and the world was flat, my manager expected me to make at least minimum 100 cold calls per day.
Hmm.
This is before LinkedIn, before any type of sales intelligence. We would be lucky if we knew what the person's title was. Now, I'm not advocating that. It's a horrible sales strategy in a modern market, but that's what we did back then. And in that 100 outreaches, I could expect to connect with a minimum of 20 to 25 people every day. In a good month of sales outreach in a modern market, you'd be fortunate to have 10 contacts in a month following that strategy, let
Right.
alone 25 in a day. It's difficult to get that initial oomph. And it's critical, but it's easily the single biggest change.
Yeah, that is actually a very good anecdote to share 'cause I remember those days as well too, and I ask myself, "What? Why am I calling these people?"
Exactly. Who are you and why am I troubling
Yes, I mean, why?
you?
Like, I want to apologize these people. And why am I bothering this guy, right? But I think it's a really important point, and it illustrates the fact of communication and being able to actually get to the right person, the decision maker, and all those things. And I agree. A lot of people will say the same thing. If you're on social media, you're going to get inundated. I mean, I can't even tell you all the people that like, why are you
Sure.
contacting me? There's no connection whatsoever. Like, did you do any research? Did you find out at all anything about me? But I'm also then curious, like, what would you then say are some topics that you would say, and hot topics, I would always describe it as, what's going on in the field that I think we could learn from?
Yeah, there are a couple of different things that you can do to fight that. Probably the single biggest thing that you can do as a startup founder, or a person responsible for talent acquisition within an early stage company, is to ensure that your company has a strong employer brand and to ensure that you have a strong personal brand. The
Okay.
more out there that you are, yes, that means that you're going to have to deal with all of the inundation of poor outreach that I described. But the more that you're able to do that, the more that you gain credibility, are viewed as a thought leader, the more receptive people are to interacting with you because you're giving them a reason.
Mm,
You're creating a landscape whereby they can see why they should engage with you before they even have to.
yeah.
Anyone who wants to engage with me can spend 5 minutes scrolling through my posts and get a very good idea of how I think and the types of ideas I'm going to share. Then they can make the determination on their own whether they want to respond to whatever outreach I do, because it's clear, it's very obvious, and that's a sound strategy in today's market. Is frankly targeted content creation.
And it reminds me of something how the sales funnel has been flipped, right? So rather than trying to get everybody and under the sun and cold call them, you know that you're dealing with people who now really, by the time they're actually contacting you, they know why they've contacted you and they've already done your research. So the sales funnel is just the opposite of what it had been. By the time somebody reaches out, I mean, they're about ready to make a move or to purchase. And that's what you have to realize. I think that's what's changed.
Gosh, I couldn't agree more. And we're talking about sales, but everything that we're talking about relates equally to building highly performant teams for a startup or an early stage company. So one of the biggest challenges that early stage and startup companies have as it relates to talent acquisition is that they want and need the top talent, but they have very little to offer the top talent. That top talent can go anywhere. If you're a software developer and a top performer, you can be at Google, at Apple, at any of the big names. So why would you join that startup? And the answer is the brand it puts forth. You need that candidate to fall in love with your mission. And the only way that that happens is, if they know what that mission is. And the only way that that happens is if you're sharing it with the world.
Yeah, and that's a really important point to me. I'd say, guys, I've worked with companies, and I'd say a lot of times employees don't know the mission, but the startup isn't just the opposite. They've actually organized this place for a reason. They have something in mind, and I think that's what attracts a talent. But I also like to touch on, I think this has something to do with your book as well, too. How do you retain those people? Because like you're saying, the top people are in high demand. How do you keep them? What are some strategies to retain some of those good people that you have managed to find?
That really is the $1 million question. So the thing to remember this. So we call it the destination employer methodology. Essentially, if you look at the top companies in any sector, so think Harvard or an Ivy League school in
Mm,
academia, think Apple or Google in technology, think
right,
McKinsey in management consulting. If you're in that space and you say those names, people know who they are.
right,
And they know that if they go there, their career is going to 10x. Okay. So that's the goal to aspire to. You want to develop a reputation for growing your folks, to making them punch above their weight for where they should be in their career based on their experience. The
hmm,
way that you do that is to mindfully build your employer brand around the three components of a candidate and employee's interaction with your company: the attraction phase, the recruitment phase, the retention phase. The way that you retain them is to make sure that they have the ability to grow in the role you hired them for and in your organization. The way that you do that, and I keep mentioning attract, recruit, retain, because it's all a continuum, is
yeah,
that when you're creating that employer brand, you're doing it mindfully so that you're attracting the type of person, the person who marries your culture.
right,
And when you move from that attraction phase to recruitment, that recruiter is making sure that they're a company fit before they even see if they're a role fit. Why? Because if you're not a company fit, you're not going to stick. You're not going to stay. There's not a reason for you to.
hmm,
So they're asking that candidate questions like, Mick, what's the next logical step in your career? What are you trying to do over the next couple of years? What are your career aspirations and goals before they even get into the role? And again, the reason being, because I've got to make sure that Mick is a long-term fit for me. Otherwise,
hmm.
he's going to bounce in a year. And there's not an opportunity to build any kind of a performant team in that short a period of time.
And that's really common. I said I'd spent some time in the Silicon Valley, and I said you can see those top talent people, they'll come to Google or the Silicon Valley, and it's something like grad school for them, right? So they
Yes.
come out and they do the grad school experience, but they have no intention of staying. And I think the fault is really on the behalf of the companies because then they just lose the good people that they managed to attract in the first place.
And I would like to add a tiny caveat that's important to keep in mind. Not all roles and not all engagements need to be 10-year engagements.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's 1,000% okay if you need somebody for a period of time and or that person wants to be with you for a season,
Yeah.
as long as we're upfront about that. If I know you're here to build a tool for my company, and when the tool is done, we don't have a reason to be together, as long as I'm upfront with that, with you with that, and you understand that, there's no harm there. There's no foul.
Yep. You're still following the goals that you have set, and you still are going to meet the objectives that you had set with both the company and that employee. So it's a win-win, I suppose you would say.
Exactly correct.
Uh, What kinds of things would you recommend business owners to consider, and what would you say that people should be thinking about currently?
Yeah, that's another great question. So startups, one of the biggest difficulties in the startup environment is that it's a hair on fire crazy place.
That's true.
Everything is happening at the same time. I remember sitting up with founders at 2 in the morning, staring at Google Sheets, trying to figure out where we were going to steal an architect for a project that we probably should have never sold, and where we're going to put somebody else in that place to make that work. It's just the nature of that beast. But with that said, it's important that you keep a mind on tomorrow. So one of the things I advocate strongly. So I mentioned in the destination employer, we've got 3 phases: attract, recruit, and retain. We break each of those phases up into 4 components for a total of 12 key elements. Those key elements touch everything that a person is going to experience in interacting with your organization,
Right.
from initial contact with your employer brand straight through exit interview when the relationship is over. It's
Mm,
it's entirely a holistic approach.
yeah.
But one of those things is the hiring plans. So as a founder or an early stage executive, you always have to have a piece of your mind dedicated to an if then statement. If we hit the sales goal, then
Mm.
I need to do this. If we land this client, then I need this talent. And the sooner you can share that information with whoever it is in your organization that's responsible for getting those folks. Now, in startups, frankly, it's usually the founding team themselves. They usually don't have dedicated talent acquisition. But whoever that is, the sooner you can get there, the sooner you can start practicing what I call proactive recruiting. So you can find the places where the top talent in that sector sits, and you can start planting seeds there to make sure that when the time comes that you need to hire people, you've got credibility, you've got a presence, and you have a voice to share.
And that's why I think that's very difficult with startups. Like you say, it's the hair on fire because they know there's a lot of gaps, but they don't always know how to fill those gaps because they're just putting out fires because everything's on fire, right?
That's why I keep my hair so short.
But it's a plan in place that when you get to that point, then you can start filling in the important gaps and the things that you really need for this business to succeed, right? Or else you're going to go away. Because I mean, the failure rate of, well, companies in general fail like very high, and within 5 years they're gone. And startups is probably even higher because they don't know how to fill the gaps because everything is a gap when they start up.
I challenge anyone watching this fine show to Google top 10 reasons why startups fail and not find wrong team, couldn't find talent on that list somewhere.
Mhm.
I have never found a top 10 list that didn't have that.
Yeah.
And the thing to keep in mind, there are resources.
Yeah.
So one of the things that founders can do, that's where outside agencies can be helpful for them. Now,
Okay.
quick note: I'm not advocating for the wholesale usage of staffing firms because it gets too expensive too fast. But if it's a key role where that founder really needs support,
Yeah.
it's something to think about. The caveat being they need to develop a relationship with a niche firm that has a long time view of the world, because there's no value otherwise.
So it's something like you have to make a decision. Do you want to have an internal HR team or do you want to try to go with the outside agency? And depending on how many resources you have and what's available to you.
Yeah, so the destination employer methodology, it works universally regardless on the size of the company. But I wrote the book targeted specifically towards startups and early stage companies for
Yeah.
just the thing that you just mentioned. So
Okay.
there are seasons in a startup. In the beginning, there's never going to be an HR firm unless it's an HR company that's being founded, because it's an expense line. No company starts with infrastructure. They start with the product team. They have to, because they don't have the budget to do otherwise.
Yep.
So most often the founders network, and then the foundings team, and then the early stage team members networks are where they get their talent. And that's great. But at a point that starts to play out. At that point, the question becomes, what's the most cost effective way to meet this need? So long-term relationships with the types of firms that can help them is usually the first answer. And then once they hit a certain hiring mass, they transition to an internal recruitment team.
Yeah.
Now, as long as they do that intelligently, that's the best and tried and true way. The most common mistake I see, however, is
Yeah.
they get their nephew's rugby coach to be their recruiter, and then expect that person to somehow be able to find AI talent, or some other super hot skill set, when the person has no real experience. So when it comes time to build that internal talent acquisition team, make sure that you're bringing in someone who's at least mid to senior level, because they're going to be running a show. If you bring in a junior person that belongs on a team getting seasoning, you're just setting them up to fail.
Yeah, that's not going to work. So I'm
Exactly.
curious now, because you got a lot of good advice here. What sort of expertise do you offer business owners, and what kinds of things can you do, or what would you suggest they reach out to you about?
Oh, thanks. So first things first, I've made every mistake you're going to make at least 5 times. I built up this scarred visage by running my face into walls like any good Marine Sergeant does. So learn from my pain. So the destination employer methodology comes from my experience building startups. Probably the biggest success I had was a company that I worked with from the founder's kitchen table to a multinational 9-figure acquisition.
Wow.
So we've done it all from 2 or 3 fellas in a basement through, again, 1,500 plus people companies. In order to help the startup community, we engage in a couple different ways. The first, of course, is the book. The Destination Employer book is going to give you the tools you need. It's written as a how-to guide. It's not a college course tome. It's
Mm.
a roadmap. Do this, get that. Do this, get that. Do this, get that. Straight through. In addition to that, roughly March, our program will be done at a self-paced program that follows the exact same layout as the book, but you
Oh,
will build your own template as you go through. So at the end, you've got the same deliverable that my consulting company would give you for a fraction of the cost. That'll be done in March. And then, of course, there's Redbeard Solutions. The Redbeard name is more aspirational these days, unfortunately, than it once was.
yeah. Where
But
did that come
our consulting company really does all the things I've described hands on. So we can engage in any number of areas to help you. We can help you with your employer brand. We can help you with your personal brand. We can help you find the places where your talent hides. We can do traditional staffing if you need that. So we can provide consultants. We can do permanent placement for you. We can do just flat out assessments of how your talent acquisition practices compare to industry best practices to support your recruiters. We've also created the industry's first recruitment and retention as a service platform for companies. So that's available as well. It's really, when it comes to startups, it's what they need. Now, in addition to that, I'm also an incubator mentor or startup mentor. So really, there's not much that we can't help with as it relates to building highly performant teams and making sure that you as an organization are able to consistently attract, recruit, and retain the top talent you need to thrive.
I'm just curious. I'm not sure if I understood it correctly. In March, is this a course, or what were you doing and launching in March?
Yeah, no, great question. So I'm calling it a program. I guess you could call it a course as well. I hesitate to use course because I think every startup founder's eyes will roll into
Yeah,
their heads. It was like, great, more homework. That's exactly what I needed in the
I
two
see.
hours I'm not at my startup. So
Yeah.
it's really a course or program that follows the exact same methodology and the exact same layout in the
Okay.
book. However, instead of just reading the material, it has all the templates, all of the things that you need to do, so that at the end of it, you have built for yourself the same deliverable that my team would build for you
I see.
for much, much, much less than what it would be to have a consulting team do it for you.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I could see what you're saying. It course sounds too academic. Like, well, I don't go back to college, right?
Exactly. It's funny because in building it, my team and I were being really careful in the packaging because again, I am a startup founder and I've been around startups more than 10 of the 25 years that I've been doing this. I
Mhm.
know what it's like. As they're sitting down and learning a new programming language that they need, they don't want to add HR functionality to their to-do list. And that's another really quick important note. Most technology folks that I deal with, this is the least favorite part of their job. They started a company to build cool stuff,
Right.
not to do employee reviews and establish a talent acquisition strategy. I get that. Just understand, folks, you don't get to build the cool stuff if you don't have the brightest minds available in your market.
No question. Like, you can build something because that's what the cool thing is, but you have to have the infrastructure and you have to have the methodology in order to get all those things. So to get to the finish line, you really have to have all these necessary components in place.
And know this, here's the good news. It's something you can offload once you've mastered it. The other piece I give of advice to give to all founders is to do everything you can yourself and to do all the things that don't scale early on,
Mhm.
so that as soon as you're able to offload the things you've identified that you don't like or you're not great at, you know enough about it to make better choices. If I'm founding a software startup and I know that I don't love that part of the role, bringing in new talent,
Yeah,
if I do it enough to understand it, then I can hand that off.
makes sense. Now, we've offered a couple times some great hints and great ideas, so that's really helpful. And also, you mentioned a book. Could you tell us how people can get a hold of you? What's the best way to reach you? You did mention LinkedIn. Is that the best way? And how do they get your book? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Thanks very much. So, my LinkedIn profile will be in the show notes. The Amazon page will be in the show notes. My email address we could put in the show notes if you'd like as well. I'm not a hard person to find. I'm very public and very out there. I believe my email address is still on my LinkedIn page. It's also on Redbeard Solutions website as
Okay.
well. So it's if you can't find me, you're not trying.
Got it. you know, awesome with the tips, with the ideas, and so much of what you're saying resonates with me because way back when, around 2000, I was in a startup and it was a really eye-opening experience. So a lot of what you're saying really resonates, and hopefully it does with the audience as well too. Thank you very much for taking some time out. It was awesome, and hopefully they reach out, get in touch with you. It sounds like you can help.
I appreciate it, Mick. I'm passionate about what I do. Startups are the future of our country. They are where the most people get hired, and anything I can do to support that, I'm proud to be a part of.
It is the engine of the American economy, and that's what we need. Let's get that economy rolling.
100%.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. Take
Thank
care.
you, Mick. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too. Well, there's a lot of good tips, lots of great ideas, and what Gerry is saying with the red beard and all is really going to help. So hopefully you reach out and get in touch with that book as well too. Reach out to him. I say the same thing. If you can't find me, you're not looking because I'm not hiding. So thanks for showing up today. Thanks for listening in. Of course, if you want to make sure that you are listening to the podcast, make sure you subscribe, like, share, and also positively review us on Apple Podcasts. That really helps us out a great deal as well. So until next time, appreciate your time listening in. Got some more great guests coming your way. Until next time, Deus Volt.